I'm delighted to welcome back to the podcast Kirsten Chick, who is a nutritional therapist, author, and all round good egg. So, welcome back, Kirsten.
Thanks for having me back, Elaine.
And since we last spoke, your book has gone into its second edition.
Yeah, I was really pleased about that because it came out during the pandemic. So I had all my final proofreads and edits in the first lockdown. So of course I wasn't really able to promote it in the usual ways. There were no book tours, there were no book signings, there was nothing like that. I was offered the option of delaying it, but it had taken me 5 years to write it, so I just wanted to get it out there. So I was like, no, let's go ahead. So we really didn't know what was going to happen with it, but sales have been trickling along really steadily, and it's gone into second edition. So I'm super happy about that.
Brilliant. So tell us about the book. Perhaps you can wave it on the screen.
Yes, so here it is. So I don't know if that might be back to front, but it's called Nutrition Brought to Life. And it's a nutrition book, but it's also got a recipe book at the back. So there's two parts. So the bulk of it is nutrition, and then there's 50 recipes. And each chapter, the subtitle is A Thorough Grounding in Nourishment, with 50 delicious recipes. So it really does take you through the basics, but in quite a thorough way. So it's very comprehensive. But also, one thing that has often been said about me when I write articles or when I run workshops or teach on courses, people have always said, oh, you really bring the nutrition to life, or you really bring the science to life and make it very easy to understand. So that's why the book's called Nutrition Brought to Life. And that's what I've tried to do all the way through. So a lot of the feedback has talked about how detailed but accessible and easy to read and engaging to read it is, which is really lovely. And it builds on themes like, the basics, going through proteins and carbohydrates and things like that, and sugar, etc. But also builds on themes like gut health, inflammation, the microbiome, the impacts of stress on the body, hormonal balance. Then at the end of each chapter, there's opportunities to reflect, try a couple of relevant recipes from the back. Then I might suggest a few activities or exercises or changes to try. So as you go through, there's opportunities to put some of it into practice. And the final chapter is a guide to how to start to incorporate some of the information to make really practical changes in your own diet, way of eating, lifestyle, and so on. So there you go, that's it.
Wonderful. And you said a very important word there, a P word, practical. So many books are full of theory, but actually, how can you translate that theory into real life? And having the recipes there is awesome, because so many of my clients, when I say to them, change to plant-based, or, ditch the dairy and so on and so forth, well, what am I going to eat? I've got, they have no, they suddenly lose all their creativity and they can't think of what to eat. So having the recipes there is really brilliant, and I definitely, in fact, I've recommended it this morning to somebody. So
Oh, thank you.
Well done, you.
And they're all plant-based recipes as well. So if somebody's not plant-based, they can obviously play with the recipes, use some of them as side dishes and so on. But they're all plant-based, so there's a really broad common denominator in there. And I really encourage people to play with the recipes anyway. So hopefully it will help. They'll help stimulate a bit of creativity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm one of these intuitive um, meal prep people. I don't do an awful lot of cooking, but I like to experiment, and I don't measure anything. I just bit of this and a bit of that and so on. My favourite at the moment that I'm really hooked on, and I can't stop making it, is cauliflower pizza. So cauliflower
Oh, nice.
pizza with all the scrummy toppings, and I just can't eat enough of it, and it freezes really well also. So no excuse, you can't get faster food than that, really. It's delicious.
And that's a really handy, isn't it, when you've got something that freezes well, and then it's just there. It just makes it so much easier for during the week, or if you've had a really busy day, any day of the week, and you're like, I just need something really quick, really easy. And if you've got something there that's ready-made and a healthier choice, then you're not going to be reaching for the ultra-processed foods, which is fantastic.
Exactly, and I think that's key, isn't it? When you have things readily available, you're not tempted to dip into things that are naughty.
Yeah.
And I find I can't buy naughty things because I don't trust myself. I can't trust myself. If I buy something naughty, I eat it, sometimes even before I've even got home from the shops, which is pathetic, but you know, I'm human. So not buying things and having things ready made, you know, having dishes already available in the fridge, and I'm sure there's lots of recipes where people who read your book can come up with all kinds of creative ideas.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you said you're only human, but that's a key point of part of human nature, is to look for something that's going to give us quick instant energy, and a quick instant hit of chemicals that's going to make us feel rewarded and happy as well. And a lot of what we consider to be naughty treats will do all of that, and then we kind of feel bad because we've done it, but actually human nature, we're hardwired to look out for those things and go after them, because that may have been a lifesaver at some point. I mean, not that you'd find, you know, a Mars bar dangling from a tree or something like that, but you know what originally it would have been the fruit and things like that. But we're still hardwired. It's more than willpower. It's not a willpower issue. So there's so much that I find that we need to address if we want to reduce all of that kind of activity. First of all, we have to do it without judging ourselves and giving ourselves a hard time, because that just adds more stress into the picture. But also there's whole layers of support that we need to put in there. You know, are we getting enough protein in other meals? Are we actually eating enough during meal times? Are we reaching for those things because we're actually thirsty rather than hungry? Are we having blood sugar dips, not because of how much we're eating or what we're eating, but the order or the times that we're eating it? Is it just that we need a bit more joy in our lives or comfort in our lives? And none of those things can be or should be addressed by willpower and giving ourselves a hard time. There are much more nourishing, joyful ways that we can address all of those things.
Absolutely. You mentioned about times of eating. What's your view on the intermittent fasting thing that seems to be very popular these days?
Yeah, I do have really quite quite strong views on that, but that my view of everything, my overriding view of everything, is that we are all individual, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So it's all about kind of exploring and really honestly exploring what's going on for us. So there, for most people, I think intermittent fasting is a great idea, and a really one of the easiest patterns for doing that is the time restricted eating pattern, where you're fasting overnight and then having a window of eating during the day. Now, how long that window needs to be, there's debates on, because a lot of the research has been done with men. There was a while ago a smallish study that was done with women, and it was particularly with women with breast cancer going through treatment. And they found that if they fasted for at least 13 hours overnight, then that was helpful for their outcomes. A lot of studies say between 14 and 17 hours overnight, but 13 hours seems to at least do well in that situation. What I'm concerned about is the amount of people doing this by skipping breakfast. Now, that will work really well for some people, but for a lot of people, actually, that can put a strain on blood sugar balance, put a strain on the adrenals. It doesn't work so well, and it might sometimes feel great because you're not asking your body to digest something first thing in the morning, but that doesn't necessarily mean that in the long term it's the best way of doing it. And there was a study that came out recently where they just followed, you know, thousands and thousands of people in America over a lifetime, and what they realized was that, or what they saw was that people who skipped breakfast were more likely to die of any health outcomes, so all mortality, deaths. And that really kind of backed up my feelings about breakfast. For most people, making sure there's a decent kind of level of protein and a few other things besides as early in the day does tend to give the body a platform to work on through the day. So I'm not saying that that's right for everybody, but that's something that I would certainly suggest people explore, is maybe having breakfast, you know, as soon as possible after waking, and then having a very early dinner, so that overnight fast can happen. And that also, it means that if you're having a particularly early dinner, by the time you go to bed and go to sleep, your digestion is completely finished, and then your repair and recovery processes can kick in, and that can't happen if you're still digesting food. So there's all sorts of reasons why I think that might be a better way to do things for most people.
That's the important thing, to recognise that we have to allow our body to digest in the evening, and you know, snacking late at night isn't a good idea, nor eating fruit which can ferment in the gut overnight and so on. And when it's explained to you, it's bleeding obvious, isn't it, that you know you wouldn't eat an apple last thing at night, or you know, a bowl of strawberries or something. But you know, how do we learn all this stuff other than going to see people like us, really? So what's your, do you have a pattern for you? Do you have a kind of a routine?
I do. I get up and if I'm exercising that morning, then I don't like to exercise on an empty stomach, but I also don't like to exercise on a full stomach. So on an exercise morning, what I do is I get up and I just have a very small, kind of like half portion of a protein shake. And it's a very simple protein shake. I normally use just a basic pea or faba bean protein powder. And I might stir in my favourite super green powder. There's not really, and I might actually put apart some of my supplement capsules and whisk that in as well. Maybe some glucosamine and vitamin C if I'm going for a run, for example. And that I'll drink when I wake up, and then I'll get ready, and within half an hour I'll be out on my run or doing whatever exercise I'm doing that morning. And then when I come back, then I have kind of a half-sized portion of breakfast. So I'm kind of splitting my breakfast in that way. But on a non-exercise morning, I'll have my breakfast usually within half an hour of getting up. I generally start with between a pint and half a pint, so between quarter and half a litre of warm water, just plain filtered water. It's some days if I drink too much, then it fills my stomach, and then I get indigestion from breakfast. So I kind of, you know, really listen to my body as I'm drinking it. And then I have my breakfast. Then I'm usually have a coffee, actually, and it might be a decaf coffee, or it might be half decaf, half normal. But that's, if I have any more than that, I'm bouncing off the walls and I won't sleep that night. But I just really like coffee, so that's what I do. And it has, you know, coffee has great benefits as well for a lot of people. For some people, it, you know, overstimulates. For some people, it upsets digestion. But for me, if I keep it to that amount, it seems to be beneficial for me. So that's a nice thing. And then generally that's me till lunchtime. And if it's not, if I find that I'm snacking, then I will address what I'm having for breakfast and have a think about, am I having enough, or is there enough protein in it? Do I need to add a bit more? Lunch is really very, at the moment, it's salads. Salads with a little bit of protein, whether it's pulses or feta cheese or something like that. And then dinner, I try and have, I try for about 5:36. It really depends on what time I finish work. and what time my husband finishes work. But again, at the moment, it's really hot at the moment. We're having a bit of a heat wave. So again, it's similar to lunch. So that's my standard. And then after dinner, I try not to have anything. Occasionally I might snack, but it's very rare. If I'm gonna snack, it'll be at about 5:30 if for some reason we can't have dinner yet and I'm having to wait. So yeah, that's current. That's my summer routine. My winter routine, I eat more, and I eat a lot more carbohydrate, and yeah, so it just varies through the year.
The important thing is about knowing the body, isn't it? So you know that what your capability is, your capacity is for coffee, and you know whether you've had enough protein or not, and so on. So it's really important. As you say, we're all different, aren't we?
This is it. And also, you know, I've missed out at the moment. I mentioned we're having a heat wave. I do have some ice cream in the fridge. I get some of those. There's a couple of brands that are really nice. They're like a lower sugar ice cream, so they're not overly sweet, and one of them doesn't even have refined sugars in, which is really nice. I think it's called do you want, am I allowed to name brands on your show? Yeah. Oppo. I really like the Oppo ice creams. So I might have a little bit of ice cream, but again, I'd really need to listen to my body around that one. So if I'm really hungry, even that one I won't have, because if I'm really hungry and I have something sweet, it will just send my blood sugar crashing and dropping and crashing and dropping. So I will have that ice cream when I want something cooling and I just want something enjoyable. It's a joy thing rather than when I'm hungry or as a standard thing. I know that if I have ice cream after dinner, it will give me indigestion either that evening or the following morning. So a lot of this, Elaine, I really think, like you just said, it's about learning what your own body likes. So I'm not going to give myself a hard time about having some ice cream. I might give myself a hard time if I have it in a way that I know will give me tummy ache. And then I get tummy ache, and then I'm like, well, Kirsten, you knew that. And I have to remember not to get stressed, because that will make the tummy ache worse, just to laugh at myself.
I bought some of those kiddie ice lolly maker things, and I have I've created myself. So I put a banana, I put almond milk or whatever other plant-based milk I've got, raw cacao, whiz it all up in the blender, and that's my ice cream. So I make banana and cacao ice lollies, and they're to die for, absolutely to die for. And
marvelous.
they're food as well. So you know, I'm very happy with those. But like you say, you know, you have to kind of spread out because of the blood sugar. Tell us a bit about the blood sugar and the effect on the inflammation in the body and the microbiome, and how that all kind of works together.
Yeah, well, it's something that particularly fascinates me, this whole cycle. And so if you're continuously putting pressure on your blood sugar, so every time we eat something, particularly if it's got, you know, higher levels of carbohydrates and sugars in there, we'll get sugar entering the bloodstream, and our body has to do something with that sugar. It has to either put it into our cells so that we can get the energy from it, or if our cells don't need the energy from it, we can store it. We have two main storage processes. We have turning it into glycogen, which is a bit like putting it in the cupboard. It's easy access. Or we can turn it into fat, which is a bit like putting it in the deep freezer. So it's long-term access. So what triggers this is hormones from the pancreas. Predominantly insulin will trigger that kind of activity. So all of our cells have insulin receptors on, and when insulin comes along and slots into the receptor, it causes a gateway in the cell to open and let some of the sugar in so that we can get the energy from it. If we've continually got loads of sugar going into our bloodstream, we'll be continually producing lots of insulin, and those insulin receptors will be fighting off the insulin to the extent that eventually they'll just shut down and go, we can't cope with this overload anymore, so we're just going to stop working. And then we can't get any, or we're massively reduced as to how much energy we can get to the cells. And this is called insulin resistance. Now, leading up to insulin resistance, and certainly once that kicks in, you end up with higher levels of sugar and insulin in the bloodstream. They create inflammation. And inflammation drives all sorts of disease processes around the body. So it underpins cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, a lot of digestive issues, joint problems, depression. There's so much that inflammation is a fundamental part of. So we really want to avoid that. So we want there to be, you know, a steady-ish stream, enough sugar going into the bloodstream to provide us with the energy that we need, but not so much that we end up stressing out those insulin pathways. So with that in mind, the way we eat sugar in itself isn't evil. The way we eat it can be really unhelpful. So if you're eating lots of sugar and refined carbohydrates all of the time, you're getting these big floodgates open of sugar into the bloodstream. But if you're just eating small amounts, then it's not going to be such a stress. If when you eat sugar at the same time, there's fibre, then that slows down how the sugar enters your bloodstream. So for example, having a whole apple compared to some apple juice. The apple's got the fibre in it, it will slow down how quickly the sugar enters the bloodstream. Whereas if you juice the apple, no fibre or very little, much less fibre, so you'll just get that sugar hit. Also, fructose, which is the fruit sugar, is particularly difficult to manage because we can't put that straight into the cells to get the energy anyway. We have to send it to the liver to convert it to glycogen and then convert it back. But in the meantime, we still produce lots of insulin. So whenever we eat fructose, we're producing insulin that's not getting used immediately, and then that can create inflammation as well. So we certainly don't want to be eating huge amounts of fructose in one go. But if there's the fibre there, then that can make it a little bit more slow release. Polyphenols can have that impact too. So that's when you're eating things like dark grapes and dark berries are really rich in polyphenols. So that will help with that too. And in fact, also what a lot of people have noticed and what studies have started to prove is that having regular protein can help keep blood sugar stable. So I find with most of my clients that having protein at breakfast helps to keep blood sugar stable actually throughout the day, and they find that they're snacking less in the afternoon and evening if they've had enough protein at breakfast. So there's all kinds of ways that we can support this. And again, so then again, it's not a willpower thing. We're just forgetting about the sugar, or we're not needing so much because what we're getting is satisfying us in a brilliant way. It's not contributing to that inflammation either. So it means that so many chemical pathways in our body are performing much better. So we're processing everything much better. We've generally got more energy. We've generally got less inflammation.
Super.
There's a third part to that, because you asked about the microbiome as well. Do you want me to add that in as well? Yeah. Okay, so if we want to add the microbiome into this mix, so that's the microbes, things like bacteria and yeasts and viruses and other microbes that are largely in the gut, but actually throughout the body. This is where things get really interesting. So one of the main roles of the microbiome is protective, and one of the main things that the microbiome does is regulates inflammation. So if our microbiome is in a really good state, it will help to combat anything else that's creating more inflammation in our bodies. If our microbiome is out of balance and we have too many of what we call pathogenic microbes in there. A lot of them feed on sugar, and some of them will get us to crave sugar. Candida is it's a really great example of that. So Candida albicans, everybody has Candida microbes. They should be there in our bodies, but if we get an overgrowth, they change their behavior and they can cause thrush, so oral thrush or genital thrush, or actually spread to eventually to lots of parts of the body and cause systemic candidiasis, which can be really debilitating, very problematic. But so we've got this Candida albicans yeast. If you feed it sugar, it releases serotonin. It makes and produces a bit of serotonin, which is going to give us a happy hit, isn't it? And I think that's so clever. It's saying, feed me sugar, and you feel happy when you do. So then you just want to eat more sugar, and then you feel happy, so you want to eat more sugar, and you're feeding the imbalance. You're also creating more inflammation and conditions that Candida loves anyway. So it's a really great example of how sometimes our sugar cravings, another example of how sometimes our sugar cravings can't be addressed with willpower. We need to address that underlying imbalance in order to get rid of that particular type of sugar craving. So, phew, there we go.
balance everywhere. You know, what we ingest, what our body digests, and we can be taking the best nutrition ever, but if our body isn't methylating properly, it's not absorbing things in the right way. There's an awful lot to all this malarkey, isn't there? It's not just what we eat, it's how we eat it, when we eat it, but overall looking at our body, how our body's reacting.
Yeah, and it does keep coming back to that, doesn't it, Elaine? It's just really settling in and sitting with our bodies and feeling what's going on and being really honest about that as well. And it can be really quite hard. A lot of people ask me, well, you know, how do you listen to your body? And it's just practice. It's just it's a mindfulness process. It's a mindfulness practice. So that's difficult for everybody on the planet anyway, just to settle into our own bodies. When we're in any kind of stress response, we're busy trying to get out of our bodies so that we don't feel anything that might be painful. So coming back into our bodies and feeling everything can be a challenge for some people, much more than others. But for most of us, settling back into our bodies and listening to it is the most healing thing. And that process in itself switches off the stress processes, which means our digestive system is going to work better anyway, and lots of other functions will too. But also it means we get used to feeling how our body feels right now. And if we can do that without judgment, with curiosity, just noting, you know, do I feel sluggish? Do I feel a bit stiff? Do I feel a bit bunged up? A bit, you know, is there pain anywhere that I wasn't expecting? And rather than getting anxious or worked up about it, just notice it, and then notice if that changes, if we change the way we're eating, what impact food has on that. And it will be different for different people. So for some people, for example, and when I run courses, I ask around the room and about, especially when we're talking about proteins, so I'll ask around the room saying, okay, so animal proteins, do they make you feel denser or lighter? And most people will say denser, but there'll always be one or two people going, no, I feel much lighter on animal proteins than I do on vegetable proteins. So it's listening to that. How does foods make me as an individual feel? That's also going to change through the year and through life. So we need to keep reassessing what's going on. So it's really about feeling our way through it. But to do that takes a lot of practice and a lot of self-honesty.
As you mentioned, you know, changes through life. So let's touch briefly on the menopause, which is a topic that really irritates me. I'm sick to death of hearing about this blinking thing that seems to have just blown out of all proportion. So what are your views on menopause? How can women prepare, or do we just kind of sail through and ignore it? You know, what's your view on the menopause topic?
Well, it's a transition, isn't it? Just like puberty, just like pregnancy, it's a hormonal transition, and that doesn't make it easy, but it does. It does help us to realise that there's an end goal to it. There's a place where things, for most people, will hopefully settle down, and this is a process that we need to go through to get there. And just like puberty and pregnancy, where hormones are different and changing, and that has huge amounts of impacts all over the body, it will be very different from each individual. So some people will absolutely sail through menopause, some people will be on the floor with it, and there's all sorts of shades in between. But also, just like puberty and pregnancy, there are so many different strategies that can support that process, and that includes diet, that includes exercise, that includes, for some people, that includes HRT. For other people, it might not do. There are certain supplements. I know you're a fan of CBD, and I take that for my perimenopausal symptoms, and certainly for mood swings it's been a game changer for me, so that's been really helpful. But it's a time where, because estrogen is so protective against inflammation, it's a time when lots of inflammatory stuff will flare up, and it's certainly something I've noticed, and it's certainly something that I've noticed with other people as well. So there may be inflammatory conditions that you think you've sorted out, you've got on top of. So for me, my main things in my life in the past have been digestive issues and joint issues, and I was like, I'm on top of those, and then suddenly I wasn't, and I had to work really hard to figure out how to get back on top of them again, because one of my protections was no longer there, or was fluctuating wildly, so I had to put in increased support there. And I've been, you know, really lucky so far. I've been able to largely manage everything with diet and exercise and lifestyle, and just making really sure that I get my regular downtime in. That's really important to me. Other people aren't so lucky and don't have quite so much control over their work lives, for example, or have, you know, young families. People are having young families a lot later in life. So I've got a lot of friends who've been through perimenopause and menopause with young children, or as their children are going through puberty. So it's, you know, so I think it's great that people are talking about it more, because actually that's one thing that I think we didn't have before that's been really great. One thing that I'm really wary of, though, is this whole medicalizing of it, and this whole movement to call it hormone deficiency disease or hormone deficiency syndrome, because I don't think it's a hormone deficiency. I think it's a shift in hormones that requires support and may require medical support, but I don't think we should just stick everybody on HRT and consider all menopausal women to be diseased and deficient because we don't have the same level of hormones that we had a few years ago. I mean, were we hormone deficient when we were 7 years old? I don't think so. So that whole narrative, I really am very uncomfortable with. I know a lot of people are arguing that you need to be that strong with it in order for it to be taken seriously, and in order for HRT to be made available to everyone who needs it, and to make surgeries a lot more educated about menopause and HRT. But I think there are other ways that we can do this that are much more balanced, shall we say. We use that word balance a lot in other situations. So that's my views on it all. What are yours, Elaine? What do you think about it all?
I was very fortunate that I didn't even think about menopause. I had my last period a week before I had my mastectomy back in 2009, and that was it. I've never had any problems before, during, or after. And my view is, if you have a strong immune system when you're approaching the age of hormonal changes, then your body will just adjust naturally, and that's it. Thank you and goodbye. So I get very irritated, shall we say, when people are making a huge drama over it, like you were saying, medicalizing it. And it's just a stage in life. Just deal with it. My approach is very not very empathic, I have to say. Yes, I do appreciate that some people do struggle, but I find that those who struggle are often people who like to invoke drama within their lives anyway. So I have to say, I'm not terribly what's the word, empathic on the menopausal thing. So I refer people to other practitioners. I'm not the person to
You're not the person for them. Yeah,
absolutely not. No.
yeah.
No.
And of course, also, I mean, something that we haven't talked about is people that go through menopause as a result of cancer treatment, for example, or hysterectomy, or both. So it's a sudden plunge into menopause, and that can sometimes be more extremely felt and experienced too. And there's often, in my experience, especially younger women, they're not even warned that that might happen, or that there might be any changes to their body. So there's been no support at all out there. So I'm encouraged to see that there's a bit more support happening there now.
Yeah, which is great, and people like yourselves who are interested in the topic and there to support people. So your book, where can people get hold of your book, Kirsten?
Oh, it's available pretty much everywhere online that you can buy books, and it's also available in some independent bookshops as well, which is really lovely. There's a list on my website, kirstenchick.com, of independent bookshops that stock it. So there's, yeah. And if anybody out there has an independent bookshop and would like to stock it, just let me know and I'll put you in touch with my publishers. And of course, you can get it from my publisher's website as well, which is alchemiapublishing.com, but pretty much anywhere online.
Fabulous. So kirstenchick.com. Thank you so much for your time today and explaining the very simple nutritional what's the book, Nutrition Brought to Life, the title of your book. Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Elaine. As always, a pleasure to be here.